Steven sent me in an email this week asking if I would clarify the difference between ballistic stretching and static stretching. This is a very, very important concept because ironically, we see more people report themselves to our wellness clinics getting injured from stretching, believe it or not, more so than physical exercise and even impact injuries. Before we get into which is better for you, which is more dangerous, which one's more effective, I need to give you a little bit of a background on what's referred to as the myotactic stretch reflex. Please don't get hung up on the big word. What I want you to stay focused on is every muscle has an origin and an insertion, and every muscle has its own little brain, known as a muscle spindle cell. When you take the length of the muscle to a length that the muscle itself feels like it's going to get torn or damaged, it invokes the stretch reflex. And what that does is it sends an electric message to the brain that says, hey, shorten this muscle before it tears. Now stop and think about that. If you're thinking about holding a rope, you're holding one end, I'm holding the end, and we've got the rope pulled very, very tight. Somebody walks up and pushes the middle of this rope. It's either going to pull and burn my hand or yours or both of ours. Well, mine's the origin, yours the insertion, yours the origin, mine's the insertion. It doesn't matter what the illustration is here. What you have to stay focused on is a muscle that's already hypertonic, very, very tight. If you try to go beyond that range of motion that it's currently capable of, the stretch reflex, its only responsibility is to protect. So it shortens, and ironically, while you're trying to lengthen the muscle, you can actually shorten it. Now let's come back to the original question. What's the difference between ballistic and static stretching? Well, ballistic stretching is when you see people, let's say that you're stretching your hamstring and you see them bouncing, right? You're like seeing if you could like bounce your way through. That's ballistic stretching. That is absolutely unequivocally a fast track to an injury. Just like having somebody push on you is also going to be detrimental. Because if the person isn't very well trained, they can't sense that tension in the muscle tissue. They're going to keep this constant pressure. Now let's go through that whole cycle again briefly. The muscle thinks it's going to tear because somebody's holding your chest down. We're acting as if we're stretching our hamstrings. Now your muscles are trying to send a message, hey, look, that hurts. The person holding you down can't feel it if they're not qualified. A good massage therapist, a soft tissue specialist, a facilitated stretcher, they actually can sense that tension and they'll back off. There's definitely a place for facilitated stretching. The question was ballistic bouncing versus static. Understand the stretch reflex, understand you bouncing or somebody holding you down that's not experienced can actually tear the origin, the insertion, or the belly of the tissue. So you can end up with a tendon tear, tendons attach muscles to bones. You can end up with a microfilament tear in the muscle. Now here's where ironic twist comes in. In an attempt to get more flexible, if you disrespect the stretch reflex and now you tear the muscle tissue now gets filled with scar tissue. Scar tissue is non-elastic, so your flexibility actually decreases. So this brings us back to ballistic stretching is bouncing and counterproductive. Static stretching is the most productive because what you're doing is, and you can do this while you're watching this video, stand up, put your right leg up on a desk or a chair depending on your flexibility. Make sure the foot on the ground is facing the same direction so your hips are squared off, and just gradually bring your chest down until you feel that slight little stretch, that little tension in the back of the leg. As soon as you feel that, stop. Please don't deepen the stretch. That's called static stretching. And now what you're doing is the muscle sends a message to the brain that says, hey, we're right on the verge of going too far. It relaxes, especially if you take a deep belly breath and you breathe through that. And then what will happen is that tension will be removed from the muscle tissue. That allows you to slightly deepen the stretch. You may not always be able to do it based on your current flexibility, hydration levels. The muscles have to slide and glide. But the idea here is when you stop at the point of feeling that stretch reflex being invoked, you reduce the risk of tearing the muscle tissue, you earn the trust of the muscle, then it'll naturally elongate. Now we have to make an assumption here that you're stretching predominantly, well, I'm going to go so far as exclusively after you've warmed up and or raced or high level of training, because the temperature in the muscle is at its highest and you've immediately reduced the risk of any kind of muscle tears. So I know this video is a little bit longer than usual, but I needed to give you the context of the stretch reflex, the difference between ballistic and static stretching, and then how do you do it correctly. You know, the beautiful part about increasing your range of motion is it is a fast track to better speed, better endurance, obviously reduces the risk of injury as well. But there's a right and a wrong way for sure. So I appreciate the question, as I do all of them. If you happen to have one, please do me a favor and send it to us. contact@coachrob.com. Please turn on the notifications and please subscribe, because we put out a new video every day here on YouTube. Appreciate your time today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.